Three parts to my talk: mulch, perennial vegetables, and self-seeding edibles in the home garden. Mulch is important in the garden, and generally when you're using mulch, it's actually a form of composting. So many of the rules are similar. For example, only use ingredients you would use in compost, and include a mix of ingredients if you can, and be aware of the nitrogen carbon ratio. However, the carbon can often be a bit higher in the garden when you're using mulch rather than in the compost heap. And also consider any potential seeds or weeds. For example, if you're using a grass mulch and you've got a lot of kikuyu, you might end up having problems. If you're using things you've weeded from the garden, you could include seeds, and which could become potential weeds. But on the other hand, you may like to keep plants like flower plants that do have seed heads and scatter them around as mulch, and you'll find they actually will start growing if you want those flowers there later on. Also consider what plants you have and make the best mulch for those, and also for the type of garden. For example, if you've got a small garden and it's very ornamental, you would want a different type of mulch than if it's a large bit of garden at the back where basically anything goes. Now, where do I go to next? Hang on. Next there. Right, why mulch? Well, the plant roots want it. In this photo here, I had a compost bin. You can see the top of compost bin there on the ground. And all the roots from, it was a Kajamaroa and a Kaffir lime tree. They basically went up in the compost bin for about 5, almost 10 centimetres. Later on, I took the bin away and the hen scratched it down and spread out the mulch, and I still keep adding material there, but it's actually made a really good layer. So you can see how the roots love that soft compost material. So do consider that. Now, down the bottom photo is actually the same garden where the previous one, and you can see it's got a good compost layer there, a mulch layer, and I just keep adding compost. This is an area where it's in the hen run, and people don't generally see it unless I take them there. So I've put all sorts of things. It's actually quite a rough mulch. You don't have to be very careful. I've got grass clippings, things are cut off the tree, weeds from other areas. At present, the hens can't get in there, but they will, and they'll turn it over and will make it into a good mulch. It's really just chop and drop. Prune the tree, that's a nectarine tree there, and a few other things. I cut them down, chop them up fairly small. I didn't bother shredding them, put them in the ground, put some weeds and some grass clippings there. This whole area is clay, and I've really got to improve the soil. Okay, other chop and drop. Here's one which I found on the net. Someone has just pruned that shrub and dropped it on the bottom. I might consider chopping it up a bit more, but you can, especially if it's somewhere at the back of border and you don't mind if people see it or they don't see it at all. Here, someone has just cut back comfrey. If you're growing comfrey around your plants, it's quite good to cut them back sometimes, or use that sort of thing as a mulch around vegetables. Here, I actually have bamboo growing, and when I want stakes, I cut them off the bamboo, strip all the leaves, and I leave the leaves down as a mulch, or I'll take it and put it somewhere else. Chop and drop is very good, especially if you've got a larger garden, which many of people mightn't have, but it's quite good. And as it says, you chop it and drop it up. And if you can, it's sometimes quite good to be cut into smaller pieces. You can have annuals or perennials or just your ornamentals, but watch out for seed pods again. If it's seeds, plants you're happy to grow there. Doesn't matter if it's got seed pods, but if it's got dock and things like that, it's something you don't want. One of the best sort of mulches is good wood chip, and I get quite a bit of that brought in. I buy it in quite a large amounts. This area here, it's actually at the Botanic Gardens. When it's fresh, I put it down in the path. Otherwise, I leave it there and I let it decompose a bit. If it's very dry, it's good to add water. It's good to add organic matter or something to help it break down. One thing I found quite useful was when I was working, we had old milk that people didn't want to drink. I would bring the milk bottle home, dilute it and pour it over the wood chip. Otherwise, you could use, just rinse out your milk bottles, liquid fertilizer, worm tea, anything else like that. If you're buying chips like that, and be careful, I've had plastic waste. I had to take out some, they just shredded that up, obviously found it. I've had moth plant seedlings come up, which I'm sure none of you really want. I've had, at present, got a lot of bay trees. Anyone a bay tree? I've got lots of bay tree seedlings coming. Obviously, this is one of the trees that were mulched, and there's a lot of little seedlings, just tiny ones, just about that size at present. I've had ivy. I've had large bits of wood or stone or other sort of rubbishy things. So watch it and get a good source. It's usually fairly cheap, and the expensive bit is actually getting it delivered to your place. Years ago, it was cheap because arborists were wanting to get rid of it. Nowadays, it's quite in demand, so there's a bit more expense. Now, they make a tidy mulch, and they do hold moisture, especially if they've been watered well, say put down last autumn. I've got areas, most of my garden's very dry, I've got to water. I've got areas that are wood mulch path, and by the way the birds and my hens go to, it's still holding a lot of moisture, a lot of life, and having good soil. So a good wood mulch layer is great. Put it down late in autumn, or make sure you well water before put it down and water as well, because if you want to keep it moist, but it's quite worthwhile. Now, grass clipping mulch, that can be useful. This is just large bits of grass clippings I got. I have a lawnmower guy, he dropped some off for me. I don't have hardly any lawn, and I don't collect my grass clippings. The only grass clippings I collect is when I clean the lawnmower at the end. It's an electric mower. Here's someone, if you got grass with leaves on, it's really good. If you collect a lot of leaves, it's good to put it on your lawn and mow over it and collect the mulch. The mixture of the leaves and the mulch is very good. Otherwise, if you've got a lot of leaves, put it in a separate pile, because they break down more by fungi than by bacteria like the rest of composting. Now, grass clipping mulch is mostly nitrogen with almost no carbon. So it's quite good to mix it with autumn leaves or torn up cardboard, or put cardboard underneath, mix shredded paper through it, or light dressing sawdust. That will help bring a bit more carbon. Mind you, if all you've got is grass clippings, and if you put grass clippings, say, around annuals or like lettuce, that works quite well. If you end up getting weedy grass clippings and you don't know where they come from, like I get it from a lawnmower guy, and I get all sorts of weeds in it, I often will let it sit there for 2-3 days and heat up, and it helps kill off a lot of the weed seeds. I still end up getting docks, so I'm very selective where I put it. I generally only put it in the hen run or mix it with other compost for composting. This is a wee bit of garden. I had fairly good compost. It came from the hen run. It didn't compost that well, but it's quite woody mulch. Because I put on the vegetable garden, it's nice and fine. I added worm manure. First, you can see here bits of worm manure. Now, I will need to cover those over, because if you're using worm compost, if it's up in the air, it will dry out and not work very well. So do cover it up if you can. I also used a seaweed fertilizer and some activated biochar. If I'd used my normal compost, I wouldn't have bothered so much with that, because when I make my compost, my ordinary compost, this is slightly different, but when I make my ordinary compost, I always put wood ash from the fire. I put trace elements and other activated things in, biochar as well, especially if it's worm manure. Here's some of the additions I will put into a compost. but I can also use it under the mulch. But just think, if you've actually only got one sort of material in mulch, you do want to add other things, because it can lack certain materials or certain elements, and the nutrients you get from that mulch is only as good as what was in the original material. So things I use, can you see the pointing there? This is wood ash. I have a wood fire burner, one of those wood burner things. During the winter, every day I sift out all the charcoal, and I have a lot of soup bones, or broth bones, and the hens peck at them, then they go in the compost, and then later on I collect them, and at the end of the night, when it's died down a bit, I put the bones on top, and in the morning they're easier to crush. So this is a mixture of ash, bone, charcoal, and everything from the fire. By the way, pretty well all the wood, we've either scavenged it all, I make sure it's not treated, or we've actually prunings from the garden. We've had the fire about 5 years, I've never bought any wood yet. Here you can see this is a trace element mix. I get that from the tree crops. One of the men there does a specific Auckland trace elements, trying to consider all the elements that are missing in Auckland soil. Otherwise, you can use sheep pellets. If you've got quite a carbon heavy one, throw some sheep pellets underneath. Some seaweed's quite good. This is a ocean fertilizer I bought. It's BioGrow certified. It's actually made from seaweed from the Northern Hemisphere. It's actually a fertilizer. It's quite good. This eggshell, I collect the eggshells. I put them in a paper bag, and every time I use the oven and I've taken things out, it's cooling down, I put the paper bag in. The best paper bags are the ones, the thick-walled flour ones or the sugar ones. My mother used to do that, and now I just copy that. Coffee grounds, Bruce, if you're there, thank you. This is fodder fertilizer. This is a soil enhancer. They actually have a fertilizer as well. It's based on coffee grounds. This company trying to use a coffee ground waste. It's also got wood ash. It's also got marine product and sawdust in, so it's good. It does help to actually activate the soil. It's called fodder, worm manure, and worm tea. And our paper and cardboard, just brown paper bags, newspaper, cardboard boxes. Now, when I try and bring cardboard boxes home, some shops you get cardboard boxes, always try and prefer to get the plain brown one than the coloured one, because less chemicals, because some of the dyes have got chemicals in. I will use it, but I usually soak it, then put it in the worm farm, but you can also put it underneath, take off any sellotape. One thing I like about the cardboard boxes, a lot of them have got boron. We're short of boron in our soils, and apparently the glue has a lot of boron in it. So the worms love it, so it's good. Seaweed's great, but usually, unless you get a lot of it, I find it better chopped up and put in the compost, or actually in a bucket of water, and use that water over the compost. However, I know some people who have access to a lot of seaweed or seagrass and use it as a very good mulch. I have heard that some of the Auckland Council actually have to clear the beaches, and they take what they clear to landfill. But if you live closer than the landfill, like people like Onehunga and that, they will actually drop it off at your place. They won't drop it off at my place, unfortunately. It can be a problem for them. I remember quite a number of years ago getting a phone call from, before we were the super city, one council was putting a quote in to clear the beaches. They wanted to know, did I have any idea with what to do with the seaweed, because they had to pay to put it in the landfill. And I think they found someone to take it. Now, these are other products you can get. Seaweed from fish, easy to get. Charlie carp. This one, Charlie carp, is actually made from waste fish product, or from the carp in Australia, which is actually a pest. It's a major pest. So they are pleased. This is one way of using a pest and making it useful. This is it's a seaweed fertilizer from the Northern Hemisphere. So it's a good one to use. Other things you can use. This in the middle is actually oat husks. This was done in Dunedin. I remember they used to have coffee husks and things like that, but don't think they have that much manufacturing. This is also Dunedin photograph. They used cardboard and mulch, and in between the sold interlay from the carpet. And over here, this is, I put some fresh coffee grounds one evening, and the next morning, it's not the best mulch, but the worms seem to like it. And one dead one dead snail, one dying, and one not very healthy one. So it did work then, but I don't guarantee it. Other things you can get are grape mark, which is a waste product from vine making, but we don't have that much around here. The only thing I have heard where someone used that, they actually had too much potash in the soil. Same with fruit pomace when they make fruit juices. So some of these could cause nutrient deficiency. So be careful about that. Wool shoddy has weed seeds. And if you're getting carpet, be very careful for synthetic contaminants. Often you'll find it's a wool carpet, but the woven base is actually made from polyester or something like that. So you end up with a mess. So there are things you can use, but be careful. Living mulch,
yep.
As well as bringing mulch there, think of growing things. Now, for example, this is a succulent, or it's ice plant. I took this photo at the Secret Garden where they're growing edible garnishes to sell. And so this is actually an edible plant. Some of those ice plants are edible. Just check it's the right one. Here is another photo that I took from them, the one on the right. This is what they've actually grown, a mulch layer it's actually for green manure, but they've got a mixture of plants planted all together. Weeds in there aren't a problem. The different types of plants help the soil. The first one on the left by the L, I've got parsley growing right next to the Malabar spinach. The Malabar spinach climbs up. I put the parsley quite there to make a mulch on the ground. It was easier than putting bits of grass or compost or so, which the birds scratch around. And that was useful because I can harvest it. And then this one at the bottom, Botanic Gardens, here's some more different ones, and they're useful plants. And I know a lot of these, they will actually just let themselves seed. And the calendula, you can see that yellow one and the whitey coloured one, the orange one, they're a good herb and edible. In fact, most of these are edible flowers if you go into the edible garden.